Well, I was thrilled when I was cast into a dual starring role in Blood from the Mummy's Tomb, playing an evil queen called Queen Tera and a modern girl, Margaret Fuchs. But even more thrills when I heard that Peter Cushing was going to be playing my father, because he was and is the master of horror. I shall never forget the first day's filming, which was when he gives me Tera's ring on my 21st birthday. And it's etched in my mind. And then at the end of that first day's filming, he heard his beloved wife Helen was desperately ill, and he had to leave the picture. And I was totally devastated. I was so sad for him and sad not to be working with him. And of course, it was really quite a traumatic time. The film was very jinxed, really. I mean, so of course, losing Peter at the very beginning was very sad. Luckily, they got another Hammer actor in called Andrew Kerr, and he became my father. But then we heard a young man from the arts department was killed on his motorbike, which was very sad. And then after 5 weeks of filming, Seth Holtz, lovely director, had had hiccups for a week. And, you know, we used to sit in rushes and think perhaps it was quite funny, him hicking away. And then one day I went into the studio and I was told that Seth and his wife had given a dinner party the previous night. And when the guests had gone, he just turned to her and said, "I'm going," and died of a heart attack. That really upset me. I mean, I'd worked with Seth many years before when I'd just come into the business, and it was a film called Monsieur Lecoq, and I was just standing in for an actress called Julie Newmar. I never thought one day I'd be his leading lady, and I was so sad. But the worst of it was the show must go on. Michael Carreras took over from the filming because, you know, Hammer was quite low budget, and they did not allow me to go to the funeral. And on the day of the funeral, I remember crying and them having to patch me up. It was a scene with Berrigan in the asylum and everything, but they would not let me go to the funeral, and I'll never forget that. It was very sad. I heard it was quite spectacular with horses and the carriage and everything. So yes, a very troubled film, and it was the first time I'd been the leading lady, so it was quite difficult for me, really. I believe that after Helen died, Peter really was in a very, very low place, and he had this wonderful secretary and her husband, and I think they took care of him. She was his world. She was his world, and it was very hard for him. I know he did come back into the business, but a shell of his former self. The Hammer films, what they created was so much better than horror films of today. I personally don't like horror films, actually. And apart from Mummy's Tomb, I've never seen one, and nor do I want to. I've tried to watch when I've known people and had friends in the horror films, but I just don't stick with it. I was always stage struck as a little girl, but I was always incredibly shy as well. And I, in fact, began life as a trainee fashion buyer at Harrods in Knightsbridge. And it's a long story, but I eventually fell into, I auditioned and got into a touring musical, and that was the start of my show business career. When I actually got Blood from the Mummy's Tomb, and I was still very shy, and I remember that every day I used to bring in a sandwich and a drink, and at lunchtime I would sit alone in my room with my sandwich and drink, probably looking at my lines. But I regret now not having socialised more, because, I mean, going to the bar lunchtime during filming is a very social thing to do, and I really never did it, and I regret that enormously. But I feel very lucky in my career because of my association with the 3 major British film series that have all become cults, and not only Hammer films, but the Carry On films and, of course, the Bond films. I was lucky enough to work with Sean Connery and Roger Moore. Roger I have a soft spot for, because I worked with him for four times. And of course, people think of Sean as the definitive Bond, but my favourite was Roger. The Carry On films were being filmed at the same time as the Hammer horror films, and two totally different genres, but two genres that became equally popular, maybe for different types of the population. But of course, Hammer films chilled the blood, and Carry Ons tickled the funny bone.